They thought they fired me from the billion-dollar tech company I built, calling it a change in direction. But what they really did was hand me the detonator to their entire empire. The glass walls of my office felt like they were closing in. From the 40th floor, I could see the entire city sprawl out beneath me, a glittering testament to ambition and hustle. My ambition, my hustle. 10 years ago, Innovate Solutions was just a concept sketched on a napkin in a dingy coffee shop. Now, it was a multi-million-dollar tech firm, the industry leader in sustainable data management. My name was David Chen, and I was the CEO, the founder, the guy whose face was on the cover of Forbes last year, under the headline, "The Future is Grain and He Built It." I love this company. It wasn't just a business, it was my child, born from sleepless nights, maxed out credit cards, and a belief that you could do well by doing good. The call had come just an hour ago, an emergency board meeting. No agenda was provided, which was the first red flag. The second was the tone in the voice of Arthur Vance, the chairman of the board. Arthur was a man I had brought on myself 5 years ago. He was old money, with a network of investors that had helped us scale. He had this silver-haired, patrician charm, but his eyes always had a cold, calculating glint. I'd always told myself it was just him being a shrewd businessman. I was a fool. Walking into the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. The 6 board members, people I had handpicked, people I'd shared dinners and celebrated victories with, wouldn't meet my eye. They just stared at the polished mahogany table as if it held the secrets to the universe. Arthur sat at the head, a smug, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. My chair. "David, thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice smooth as venom. "We have a delicate matter to discuss." I sat down, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "What's going on, Arthur? If this is about the Q3 projections, I've already sent out the revised forecast. We're looking at a 15% beat." Arthur chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "It's not about the numbers, David. The numbers are adequate." He let the insult hang in the air. "This is about leadership, direction. The board feels, and I must say I concur, that Innovate Tech has outgrown its current management structure. It's time for a more traditional hand on the tiller." The coded language was so blatant it was almost comical. Traditional. I knew exactly what that meant. I was the only black man in that room. I was the one who insisted on diversity initiatives, who promoted a young, brilliant woman from a state school to be our CTO, who refused to play the good old boys golf games Arthur was so fond of. "What are you saying, Arthur?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, professional. "We're saying you're out, David," he said, dropping the pretense. "The board has decided to terminate your contract, effective immediately." My blood ran cold. "You can't. It requires a majority vote, a formal, scheduled vote with cause." Arthur leaned back, steepling his fingers. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Cause? We have a whole file. Fiscal recklessness on your community outreach programs, creating a divisive workplace environment with your hiring policies. It's all here. But frankly, we don't need it. The board has made its decision." I looked around the table. At Maria, who I'd mentored since she was an intern. At John, whose kids' medical bills the company had quietly covered when his insurance fell through. Silence, averted eyes, complete and utter betrayal. "Let's see the vote then," I demanded, my voice rising. "Put it on the table. Let's see who has the spine to vote against the man who built this entire company from nothing." Arthur's smirk widened into a full-blown grin. "That won't be necessary. As chairman, I am exercising my prerogative to enact the will of the board. This isn't a discussion, David. It's a notification." Before I could even protest the illegality of it all, 2 large security guards I'd never seen before entered the room. They stood behind my chair, silent and imposing. It was a coup, A brazen backroom coup. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," I seethed, standing up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and hot it threatened to consume me. "I'm sure we will," Arthur said dismissively. "Your personal effects will be boxed up and sent to you. Please hand over your company phone and access card." Humility washed over me as I placed my key card and phone on the table. The guards flanked me, ready to escort me out of my own building like a common criminal. As they walked me through the open-plan office, past the faces of my employees, confused, shocked, and scared, my mind was a blur of fury and disbelief. They were stealing my life's work. We reached the lobby, the grand, sunlit atrium with the massive Innovatech logo I had designed myself on the wall. As I was being pushed towards the revolving doors, my eyes caught the small plaque beneath the logo. It was a quote I had insisted on putting there. "What is built on a clever foundation can never be truly taken." And then it hit me. A memory so deeply buried in the architecture of the company that I had almost forgotten it myself. It was a secret I had built into the very core of our proprietary software, our crown jewel, the engine that ran everything. A digital failsafe. A little back door I coded in the earliest days, a complex string of personal code I named Dataless. I created it as an ultimate security measure against a hostile takeover, a way to protect my creation. I never imagined the hostility would come from within. Arthur and the board thought they had just taken my company. They thought they had won. Standing there on the pavement, watching my name being digitally scrubbed from the CEO parking spot, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. They hadn't just stolen my company, they had just handed me the detonator. The revolving door spat me out onto the concrete jungle of downtown. The city noise, usually a symphony of ambition, was now a cacophony of screeching tires and distant sirens. For a moment, I just stood there, the cool autumn air doing nothing to quell the fire in my chest. My creation, my legacy, hijacked in a 10-minute boardroom ambush. They thought they had cut the head off the snake, but I wasn't the head. I was the architect of the entire serpent, and I knew where all the venom was stored. My first instinct was to go home, to my penthouse apartment that overlooked the very building I was just exiled from. But that was the first place they'd expect. My home network, my devices, they were all likely compromised, or at least monitored. Arthur wasn't a tech genius, but he was paranoid and rich, a combination that meant he'd hire people who were. No, I had to go dark. I walked 10 blocks, my movement stiff and robotic, until I found a small hole-in-the-wall electronics shop. I paid cash for a burner phone and a cheap no-frills laptop. Then I found a coffee shop with terrible coffee and reliable public Wi-Fi, settling into a sticky booth in the back corner. I powered on the laptop, the unfamiliar operating system a blank slate. My fingers flew across the keyboard, not accessing Innovatech's network, but a private, encrypted server I'd maintained for years, my digital lockbox. Inside was the key, the complex activation sequence for Dataless. It wasn't a simple kill switch. That would be too merciful and far too easy to trace. Dataless was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage, a digital cancer. Once activated, it wouldn't crash the system. It would begin to subtly corrupt data at the root level, but only for users with specific administrative permissions, the permissions Arthur and his newly appointed cronies would be using. Financial reports would have figures transposed by a single decimal point. Client data would be misindexed, making it nearly impossible to retrieve accurately. The changes would be so small at first, they'd be dismissed as glitches, as user error. The new leadership would look incompetent, chasing ghosts in the machine, while the system slowly, methodically ate itself from the inside out. By the time they realized the full extent of the damage, the company's data, its only real asset, would be an unsalvageable, chaotic mess. But I needed an entry point. The system was designed to be a fortress from the outside. I needed a key, a Trojan horse. I needed someone on the inside. My mind immediately went to Sarah Jenkins, my CTO. I had pulled her from a junior developer role, seeing a spark of genius that her previous managers had dismissed. She was fiercely loyal, brilliant, and she despised the cronyism that Arthur Vance embodied. But asking her to help was putting her career and potentially her freedom on the line. I had to take the chance. I used the burner phone to send a message through a secure app I knew she used. The message was simple. Emergency. Coffee shop on 8th and M. Your corner booth. Alone. 10 minutes of agonizing silence passed. My lukewarm coffee sat untouched. Then a reply. A single thumbs up emoji. An hour later, she slid into the booth opposite me, her face pale with worry. "David, what in God's name happened? They're telling everyone you resigned for personal reasons." "Arthur." The silence in that boardroom was a physical thing. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind of quiet that precedes an execution. 40 floors up, looking out over the city I helped build, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Across the polished mahogany table, Richard Sterling, the chairman of the board, stared at me. He had silver hair, a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, and a smile that never quite reached his cold blue eyes. He was old money, the kind that saw a man like me not as an equal, but as a temporary, useful tool. He began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "We appreciate everything you've done for Innovatech." I felt my jaw tighten. That's how they always start, the corporate eulogy. I had taken Innovatech from a garage startup with a revolutionary idea to a billion-dollar tech giant in 7 years. My face had been on the cover of Forbes. Our flagship software, Chimera, a predictive analytics engine I personally designed, was the undisputed king of the market. We weren't just successful, we were dominant. And it was all thanks to me, my vision, my code, my sleepless nights. "But the board feels," he continued, steepling his fingers, "that it's time for a change in direction. A different leadership style is needed for the next phase of our growth." I looked around the table. The other 4 board members, all of them white, all of them brought in by Sterling after we went public, refused to meet my gaze. They were studying their manicured nails, the water glasses in front of them, the skyline, anything but the black CEO they were about to crucify. "A change in direction?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Richard, we just posted record profits for the 3rd quarter in a row. Our stock is at an all-time high. What direction is better than up?" Sterling's smile tightened. "The numbers are only part of the story, Marcus. This is about culture, synergy, a certain fit." And there it was, the coded language I had been dealing with my entire career. Fit. It was never about my performance, which was flawless. It was about my face, my background, the fact that I didn't golf at their country club or laugh at their stale backroom jokes. I hadn't just built a company, I'd built my company, with a diverse, brilliant team that made them uncomfortable. "Let's cut the crap, Richard," I said, leaning forward. "You want me out. Fine. Call the vote. Let's see how it plays out." I knew I had the loyalty of at least 2 of the board members who owed their positions to me, not Sterling. The bylaws were crystal clear. The CEO could only be removed by a formal majority vote. It would be a messy fight, but a fight I could win. Richard Sterling actually chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "The vote is a formality, Marcus, a procedural nuisance. The decision has been made. Your access has been revoked. Security will escort you from the building to collect your personal effects." The air left my lungs. "Without a vote? You can't do that. It's a breach of contract, a violation of the corporate charter." "Our legal team feels differently," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Consider it a restructuring of leadership. Your position has been made redundant, effective immediately." It was a coup, a blatant, illegal power grab. They weren't just firing me, they were erasing me. The humiliation was a hot flash, starting in my chest and spreading to my face. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Two security guards, men I'd shared a coffee with just that morning, entered the room and stood by the door. Their faces were impassive. As they walked me down the long hallway, past the glass-walled offices of people I had hired and mentored, I saw it. Someone was already at my office door, a small crowbar in hand, prying off the bronze nameplate that read, Marcus Thorne, CEO. They walked me to my office, giving me one cardboard box and 5 minutes to clear out a decade of my life. I packed a few photos, a treasured engineering award, and my lucky coffee mug. As I was packing, my eyes fell on a framed document on the wall. It was the original patent for the core algorithm of Chimera. My name was listed as the sole inventor. An idea, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, began to form in the furnace of my rage. They marched me to the elevator, down to the lobby, and out onto the street, dumping me on the curb like yesterday's trash. The glass doors slid shut behind me, reflecting the image of the skyscraper I had built, now a monument to my own betrayal. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken my company. What Richard Sterling and his cronies didn't know, what no one knew, was that when I built Chimera, I built it with a secret. I had learned early in my career to never give away the keys to the kingdom. Chimera wasn't just software running on their servers. It was my architecture, my intellectual property, and it was intrinsically, digitally tied to its creator. They had just fired the only man on Earth who knew how to keep the heart of their multi-billion-dollar company beating. Standing on that cold pavement, the city noise buzzing around me, the initial shock finally gave way to a chilling clarity. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a system alert, an automated one I had set up years ago. User_mthorne.admin access revoked. The system now officially considered me an outsider, an enemy. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. An enemy is exactly what I was about to become. I pulled out my phone, not to call my lawyer, but to open a secure terminal app I'd designed myself. My fingers flew across the screen, typing in a string of code that was burned into my memory. It was a command that initiated a sequence I had named the Sunset Protocol. A failsafe I had built for a day just like this. A day I had prayed would never come. The code was elegant in its simplicity. Execute.sunset protocol. I hit enter. High above me, on the 38th floor, a server rack containing the core of InnovateTech's operations would now be receiving its final set of instructions from its true master. They thought they were just revoking my keycard. They had no idea. They had just handed me the detonator. Nothing happened. For a full 10 minutes, I just walked. I didn't hail a cab, didn't look back. I just put one foot in front of the other, letting the anonymity of the crowded sidewalk wash over me. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but it was now controlled. Rage is a powerful fuel, but only when it's channeled. Uncontrolled, it just burns you out. I had work to do. My revenge wouldn't be a fiery explosion. It would be a slow, creeping ice age that would freeze them out of existence. I finally got a taxi back to my penthouse, a place whose mortgage was paid by the very stock they thought they were stealing from me. The irony was delicious. Inside, I didn't pour a drink or smash anything. I went straight to my home office, a room that looked more like a NORAD command center than a study. Multiple monitors, dedicated servers, and a direct fiber line. This was my real sanctuary. I brought up my private monitoring dashboard. It was a network of backdoors and listening posts I had embedded deep within InnovateTech's infrastructure years ago. Not for any malicious purpose originally. It was for diagnostics, a way for me to see the health of my creation from anywhere in the world. Now it was my spyglass into the heart of the enemy camp. The Sunset Protocol wasn't a kill switch. That was too crude, too obvious. It was a digital decay algorithm. It wouldn't crash the system. It would slowly and methodically corrupt it from the inside out, in ways that were designed to mimic catastrophic but natural system failure. The beauty of it was in its subtlety. For the first 24 hours, the effects were microscopic. A 0.01% increase in data packet loss. A single corrupted bit in every 10 million lines of code. Nothing any diagnostic would ever flag. It was the digital equivalent of introducing a prion disease. Slow, undetectable, and always fatal. The next day, Innovotech announced my resignation to pursue other opportunities. They named Todd Chamberlain, Sterling's nephew, and a man whose greatest technical achievement was setting up his own Wi-Fi router, as interim CEO. I actually laughed. They were replacing a master watchmaker with a guy who could barely tell time. This was going to be even easier than I thought. That evening, I got the first message I was waiting for. It came through an encrypted channel from Priya Sharma, my former head of R&D and one of the most brilliant engineers I'd ever met. She was my protege, fiercely loyal, and the only other person on Earth who came close to understanding Chimera's true complexity. Her message read, "Marcus, what is going on? They're saying you resigned. No one believes it. The atmosphere here is toxic." I replied simply, "It was not my choice. Stay safe, watch the system. Tell me if you see anything strange." 2 days later, her next message came. "Strange doesn't begin to cover it. We're getting phantom bugs. Data reconciliation reports are off by fractions of a percent. Todd told us to ignore it, said it was statistical noise. I've never seen anything like it. It's like the code is drifting." Drifting. I smiled. That was the perfect word. The protocol was working. It was first targeting the system's error checking and self-correction subroutines. It was teaching Chimera to lie to itself, to accept and even propagate its own tiny errors. By the end of the week, the statistical noise had become a roar. Priya was frantic. Client dashboards are flickering. Our biggest hedge fund client just called, said our predictive models are lagging the market by 3 seconds. 3 seconds, Marcus? That's an eternity in high-frequency trading. They're threatening to pull their contract. Todd is in a full-blown panic. He's blaming it on a solar flare. A solar flare? I had to give the idiot points for creativity. The true genius of the Sunset Protocol was that it didn't just break the system, it made the system impossible to fix. Any attempt to patch the code would be met with my algorithm's adaptive defenses. It would shift the corruption to a different module, create new phantom bugs, and rewrite the system logs to erase any trace of the changes. The tech team at Innovotech wasn't fighting a bug, they were wrestling with a ghost I had created. The breaking point came the following Monday. It was the day their biggest client, the multi-trillion-dollar investment firm Omnicorp, was set to execute a series of automated global trades based on Chimera's quarterly forecast. It was a 7-figure-a-day contract, the crown jewel of Innovotech. I watched it happen in real time on my monitor. I saw the data stream from Chimera to Omnicorp's servers. But it wasn't the right data. My protocol had subtly altered the core predictive algorithm, introducing a cascading error that amplified with every calculation. It was now advising Omnicorp to short stocks it should have bought and buy stocks that were about to tank. It was feeding financial poison directly into the veins of Wall Street. My phone rang. It was Priya, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "Marcus, oh my God, Omnicorp,
They just lost an estimated $900 million in the first hour of trading. They're blaming us. The call came directly to Sterling's private line. I was outside his office. I've never heard a man scream like that. He smashed his phone against the wall. I stayed silent, letting her continue. They're having an emergency board meeting. They flew everyone in. Todd is useless, just sweating in a corner. The entire tech team is locked in the server room, but they can't find anything wrong. The diagnostics all say the system is green. They think the system is fine, but the data, Marcus, the data is poison. It's all wrong. She paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. This isn't a bug, is it? It's too perfect, too elegant. Stay safe, Priya, I said calmly, and stay clear. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, looking at the city lights twinkling below. Up in that glass tower, those men were trapped in a room, staring at their company's stock price plummeting on a live feed, brought on by a system they couldn't understand, fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They thought they had cut out the heart of the company when they fired me. They were about to learn they hadn't just cut out the heart. They had triggered the self-destruct sequence on the entire body, and the countdown had just hit 0. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Innovotech's stock didn't just drop, it fell off a cliff. Financial news channels ran my picture next to Todd Chamberlain's, the damning side-by-side of the architect and the court jester who had inherited his kingdom. The headlines were brutal. Innovotech implosion. Chimera turns rogue. Is this the end of algorithmic trading? They called it a black swan event, an unpredictable catastrophe. I watched it all from my command center, sipping a cup of coffee, feeling a cold, satisfying sense of justice. They wanted to erase me, so I was erasing their legacy. Priya's messages became my primary source of intel. She described a company in the throes of a death spiral, hysteria, blame, and sheer unadulterated panic. Sterling had apparently locked himself in his office for a day, refusing to speak to anyone. When he emerged, his face was ashen, his ironclad confidence shattered. They had brought in a team of elite cybersecurity consultants from a firm called CyberSolve, the best money could buy. They were the cleanup crew for corporate disasters, the digital undertakers. They're here now, a team of 6. They look like they walked off a movie set. They've quarantined the main server room. They're treating it like a biohazard zone. They're telling everyone it's a sophisticated external hack, probably state-sponsored. I almost laughed out loud. A state-sponsored hack? It was the perfect scapegoat. Of course they couldn't admit the truth, that their own arrogance and prejudice had signed their death warrant. They couldn't admit that the man they threw out on the street was now single-handedly dismantling their empire from his living room. For 3 days, CyberSoft tore the system apart. I watched their every move through my back doors. I saw their diagnostic tools run, their queries ping my dormant code. It was like watching a team of toddlers trying to solve a quantum physics problem. They were looking for malware, a foreign intrusion. They couldn't conceive that the system itself was the disease. The Sunset Protocol was designed to look like the native architecture of the system. It didn't look like a virus. It looked like a fundamental law of Chimera's universe. And every time their scans got close to one of my protocol's core tendrils, it would seamlessly migrate, hiding in a different subroutine, leaving behind nothing but corrupted data logs that told a story of random, unrepeatable hardware failures. After 72 hours of fruitless work, CyberSolve came to a conclusion. I intercepted their preliminary report to the board. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, basically admitting they had no idea what was wrong. They recommended a full system shutdown, a deep forensic analysis of the source code offline, and a complete rebuild from archived backups. It was the only logical move for them. It was also the exact move I had anticipated. This was the moment for Phase 2. The Sunset Protocol wasn't just an agent of decay. It had another function, a final defensive measure I'd woven into its DNA, a dead man switch. If anyone tried to access Chimera's source code directly or take the core servers offline without my specific authorization key, the protocol would interpret it as a lethal threat. Its response would be instantaneous and absolute. It was a command I called Scorched Earth. It wouldn't just wipe the active servers. It would send a cascade of targeted deletion requests to every off-site and cloud backup Inotech had, using their own security credentials against them. It would simultaneously encrypt every file with a key so complex that all the computing power on Earth couldn't crack it in a million years. It was the digital equivalent of salting the Earth so nothing could ever grow there again. It would leave them with nothing, not a single line of code, not a single byte of client data, just the smoking crater of a billion-dollar company. Priya's message came through, her words typed in a rush. "Marcus, they're going to do it. They're shutting it all down. Midnight tonight. They're going to try and roll back to the last stable backup from a month ago. Sterling just signed off on it. They think they can cut out the infection and start over." They thought it was an infection. They still didn't realize they were the disease, and I was the cure. I looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m. 2 hours until they flipped the switch that would obliterate their own company. It was time to stop being a ghost. It was time to let them know who was haunting them. I'd bypassed all of Inotech's security, a trivial task for me, and composed a direct, unencrypted email. I sent it to only one person, Richard Sterling's personal private account. The subject line was simple, a message from your founder. The body of the email was even simpler. It contained only a single live updating line of code from the Chimera system, the exact command sequence the CyberSolve team was preparing to enter to initiate the shutdown. It was a line of code no one outside that quarantined server room could possibly know. Below it, I wrote a short message. "Richard, you are about to give an order you believe will save your company. You are wrong. You are about to execute it. The moment you take Chimera offline, my algorithm will erase everything. Not just the active servers, the backups, the archives. Every piece of data, every line of code I ever wrote for you will turn to dust. You fired your creator. You have no idea what you've unleashed. You have one chance to stop this. Reinstate my full administrative access and call my personal number. You have until midnight." I hit send. Then I sat back and watched my monitor, which showed a live feed of the network activity in the server room. I saw my email get delivered. I saw it being opened. Now the choice was his. He could trust his multi-million-dollar consultants, or he could trust the warning from the ghost he thought he'd exorcised. He could save his pride, or he could save his company. But he couldn't do both. My phone remained silent. 11 p.m. came and went. Then 11:30. Through my dashboard, I could see the digital preparations for the shutdown continuing unabated. The technicians were staging the commands, running final diagnostics, completely oblivious to the fact they were sharpening the guillotine for their own necks. Sterling was going to call my bluff. His arrogance, the very trait that led him to oust me, was now preventing him from seeing the abyss he was about to step into. Pride, it seemed, was a far more powerful motivator than survival. At 11:58 p.m., my phone finally rang. The caller ID was blocked, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before answering, savoring the sound. "This is Marcus," I said, my voice calm and even. "Thorne?" Richard Sterling's voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of all its condescending smoothness. It was the voice of a man staring into the void. "What have you done?" "I built a failsafe, Richard, to protect my work from people like you," I replied coolly. You have less than 2 minutes to make a decision. You can't be serious. You'd destroy your own creation? You'd burn down $1 billion company out of spite? The desperation was thick in his voice. You already destroyed it. You destroyed the culture, you destroyed the trust, and you tried to destroy me. This is just the epilogue. 1 minute, Richard. I could hear frantic, muffled voices in the background. He was in the server room. I could picture the scene. The CyberSolve team looking at him, confused, as he held his phone, his face a mask of horror. He was finally understanding. He wasn't dealing with a hacker. He was dealing with a god, and he was standing on the altar. "What do you want?" he finally choked out. The question hung in the air. What did I want? Revenge was a hollow prize. Money? I had plenty. My job back? I would never work for these people again. I wanted something more. I wanted justice. I wanted them to pay, not just with money, but with their power, their legacy. "It's too late to stop it," I lied. "The protocol is autonomous now, but there might be one way to contain the damage, a transfer of ownership." "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "At midnight," I said, my voice dropping, becoming methodical. "The Scorched Earth protocol will begin erasing your backups. But I designed a single exception. It will not touch any data that is in the process of being transferred to a new authorized owner. I am sending you a document. It's a bill of sale. You and every member of the board will sign it. You are selling the entirety of Inotech's assets, what's left of them, to a new holding company. Sell it? For how much?" he asked, a flicker of businessman's hope in his voice. $1, I said. "And the name of the new holding company is Priya Sharma Holdings, LLC. You have 30 seconds to get everyone to sign." Silence. The sheer audacity of my demand must have stunned him. I wasn't just taking the company back. I was giving it away to the one person I trusted, my loyal protege. I was tearing down their patriarchal, old money empire and handing the keys to a brilliant, deserving woman of color. It was the ultimate repudiation of everything they stood for. "You're insane," he breathed. "Tick-tock, Richard." I emailed the document. I watched my screen as the file was received, opened, and sent to a network printer. I heard the printer whirring in the background of the call. I heard Sterling barking orders, his voice cracking. "Sign it, everyone, sign it now." At 11:59:58, a scanned copy of the fully executed document appeared in my inbox. 5 signatures, all scrawled and shaky. It was done. At precisely midnight, I sent a single encrypted command from my phone. It wasn't the Scorched Earth command. It was a deactivation code for the Sunset Protocol. On the Inotech servers, the phantom bugs vanished. The data corruption ceased. The digital decay reversed itself in a nanosecond. Chimera was whole again, pristine. "Check your system diagnostics," I told Sterling, a smile touching my lips for the first 2 weeks. I heard a gasp on the other end of the line. One of the technicians was shouting, "Sir, I don't believe it. Everything's green. The data streams, they're stable. They're perfect." "How?" Sterling whispered. "You just sold the company to its new rightful owner," I said. "The system no longer considers you a threat. It considers you irrelevant." I hung up the phone. The next morning, Priya Sharma, backed by a new board of my choosing, walked into the Inotech headquarters as its majority shareholder and CEO. Sterling and his cronies were fired by a simple one-sentence email. Their access cards deactivated before they even got to the lobby. They were left with nothing but the single dollar we had paid them and the public humiliation of having been outmaneuvered and bankrupted by the man they had so casually discarded. I never set foot in that building again. I didn't need to. I acted as a silent advisor to Priya as she rebuilt the company, better and stronger than before. We renamed it Phoenix Technologies. It felt appropriate. Inotech was dead, But from its ashes, we had built something new, something honest, something that was truly ours. They thought they could fire me without a vote. They learned, in the most expensive way imaginable, that my vote was the only one that ever mattered.